Good evening, everybody. My name's E.R. Anderson. I'm the executive director of Charis Circle. Charis Circle is the nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books, and Charis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. I'm so thrilled to be here tonight to celebrate We Are Each Other's Harvest, celebrating African American farmers, land, and legacy. We are joined by the Auburn Avenue Research Library on African American culture and history, and we are honored to have Frederick Salim Cox, a research librarian, in the chat with us, helping us with amazing resources and links. The Auburn Avenue Research Library is currently closed to browsing, but is open online 24/7. You can do some very late night research if you care to, but you can also reach out to them for any projects that you're interested in. It's an amazing archive, and those of us who live in Atlanta are very lucky to have this resource in our city. So you'll be seeing stuff dropped into the chat. Just know that these links are going to stay up in perpetuity. So you can come back to this event, rewatch it as many times as you want, explore the links as many times as you want. So we're going to encourage you to stay with our main event and the main conversation, and then go back and visit the links towards the end of the evening. If at any point you would like to ask a question, please feel free to click this Ask a Question button in the bottom center of your screen. We love for you to shout out where you're watching from in the chat. Let us know what brought you here tonight. Are you a farmer? Are you on your ancestral land that you have spent, your family is from? Are you new to the land that you are on? Are you hoping to become a farmer? We love to know these kinds of things. We also love to know who your favorite Queen Sugar character is. So tell us, let us know. So let me go ahead and introduce our esteemed panelists tonight. So I'm going to start with our interviewer, who is Dr. Monica White. Dr. White is an associate professor of environmental justice at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. She holds a joint appointment in the Department of Community and Environmental Sociology and the Nelson Institute of Environmental Studies. She's the first Black woman to earn tenure in both the College of Agricultural Life Sciences and the Nelson Institute at UW-Madison. She is also the past president of the board of directors of the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network. Her research investigates Black, Latinx, and Indigenous grassroots organizations that are engaged in the development of sustainable, community-based food systems as a strategy to respond to issues of hunger and food inaccessibility. Her first book, Freedom Farmers, Agricultural Resistance, and the Black Freedom Movement, was published with the University of North Carolina Press and received the 2020 First Book Award from the Association for the Study of Food in Society and the 2019 Eduardo Bonilla Silva Outstanding Book Award from the Division of Race and Ethnic Minorities section of the Society for the Study of Societal Problems. Starting in the fall of 2021, Dr. White will be the inaugural director of the Office of Environmental Justice and Community Engagement at UW-Madison in the Nelson Institute. We love Freedom Farmers. It has been a bestseller at Charis, so we are very honored to have Dr. White with us. And we are here tonight to celebrate with Natalie Baszile. She is the author of the novel Queen Sugar, which was a San Francisco Chronicle Best Book of 2014, longlisted for the Crooks Corner Southern Book Prize, nominated for an NAACP Image Award, and adapted for television by writer-director Ava Duvernay, and co-produced by Oprah Winfrey for OWN. Baszile holds an MA in Afro-American Studies from UCLA and is a graduate of Warren Wilson College's MFA program for writers. She lives in San Francisco, and the book we are here celebrating tonight is We Are Each Other's Harvest, celebrating African-American farmers, land, and legacy. So I'm going to go ahead and unmute both of you and invite you to the stage. We are so glad to have you both here.
I am beside myself with excitement.
Thank you.
Yes.
Same here, Monica.
Such an honor. And I think, it's important for us to sort of acknowledge sort of where we've come in what feels like a short time.
Yes.
But wondering if we can talk a little bit about maybe a year ago, we weren't having these conversations about Black farmers. Exactly. And today, it's a topic of conversation. It's been a testimony and, current conversations around funding. So I'm just sort of, you're interested in sort of thinking and hearing you talk about what your commitment was to articulating the work of Black farmers using a different frame, right? Mm-hmm. So I think often we think about sharecropping, tenant farming, and slavery, and you heard a different voice.
Yes.
So I wanted to wonder if you could just sort of talk about just the nature of the conversation and how quickly we've seen the conversation change.
Yeah. Well, I mean, first off, you're absolutely right. It's remarkable how the story of Black farmers it seems like it has just exploded into the public consciousness in a way that a year ago, God knows, 4 years ago, 10 years ago, it was on the margins. And that was alarming to me then. And so I feel like, oh, finally, this wave has crested and farmers are getting the attention that they deserve. But to answer your question, I cannot really identify the moment when I started thinking about Black farming. And the reason is because I am the product of people who have a connection to the land, right? And so that was always part of my kind of the waters that I was swimming in on my dad's side. It was through his Louisiana roots and just his connection to the land. He did not ever talk about coming from farmers, but he worked the land as a boy. He picked cotton and rice and, I'm the product of the Great Migration as a result of him. And then on my mother's side, she is an avid gardener. And she comes from people who really understood that connection to the land. And so for me, this idea of being connected and having our hands in the soil has always been a positive thing, Monica. It's always been positive. And I think the one kind of early image I had is of Pigford versus Glickman. And seeing those Black farmers converge on Washington. And that was really the first time, and I was probably in my early 20s, I think. I can't do the math, but it was a while ago, right? I was probably older. But that was the first time I was like, wait a minute, what's happening here, with these farmers, and what is this story? And so, but my own personal experience of this has been a source of strength and inspiration. And that is what carried me into writing Queen Sugar and also this book. It's being very proud of that legacy and wanting to share that.
So what I love is your commitment to offering a different perspective. And I think, the ways that you and I kind of yin and yang, it's sort of like you did it in writing Queen Sugar and then entered into a popular culture sort of conversation. And so the beauty of our relation, I mean, I feel like we were friends. We knew each other before we knew each other because
exactly
very different ways we were writing a similar story. And I was shocked by how much I felt you were like seeing and telling the same story that I wanted to tell, and the lens through which you saw, respected and appreciated Black farmers. I could see it both in your book, but also on the screen. So as I was writing Freedom Farmers, it was sort of like, okay, I'm not crazy. Okay, it's here. Like we have data.
There is something here. There is something here. And
I'm not the only one.
Exactly. And what I so appreciate about, like you said, the doors that we are entering, we are both entering as storytellers. And I remember, you from the academic side, me from the from the fiction side. But I think we both felt this impulse to capture these stories and celebrate these people, right? Who are, to me, kind of the holders of knowledge. When I think about what Black farmers represent to me, it is really the closest thing I have, and I'm sure you feel this way, to like ancestors, right? Walking around with all this knowledge and experience and wisdom and so much texture, they represent so much. And so I remember when I heard about Freedom Farmers, I was like, who is this woman who's writing about this? And then I saw your conversation at the Southern Foodways Alliance. And I was like, oh, she is relating to this. She is feeling the same pull that I am feeling. So,
and I had to, I confess, I tell everybody, it took my two dear friends, Dara Cooper of the National Black Food and Justice Alliance and Ashante Reese, author of Black Food Geographies. My dear friends were like, girl, why aren't you watching this? And I couldn't because for some people it was entertainment. But for me, these stories and the grief in the first 2 episodes, it was overwhelming. Like, it wasn't just, here's a show, here's a movie. It was like, I know, not only do I know people who do this, but there was a part, before Nova, wrote the book, there was a part I felt like I was Nova.
Yes, I can totally see that.
Right. And so I just feel like, the sincerity and the compassion and the thoughtfulness with which you wrote both books is so incredibly beautiful and so powerful. And I feel like there's such a courage that you have to unearth the stories in a way that was so vastly different than the stories we had previously been telling about Black farmers. And so I wonder if you have any suggestions or recommendations for authors, just for folks who want to tell stories that what I often say is people think they already know everything about Black farmers. But then when we read Queen Sugar, and then, grab a hold of this, y'all cannot sleep on this. You need this book in your life. When you hear this, it's almost a liberating sort of because I feel like as Black people, we've been taught to be almost embarrassed. But I think telling is such a story of struggle and triumph, but of liberation and of freedom.
Yes.
So how would you encourage young folks who may not have the evidence for something they feel in their soul for a story that needs a counter narrative?
I would say you really have to trust your gut. I mean, it really, that sounds simple, but it is so true, because when I started writing Queen Sugar, for example, I had it was important to me. And I felt that there was a story about Black people that was not part of the narrative, right? When I was working on Queen Sugar, no one was talking about Black farmers. No one was talking about Black farmers in book form, right?
Right.
And so, but I kept thinking, wait a minute. These people are out here. This is a history. These are stories about real people that need to be told. The world needs to understand that Black farmers are part of this American narrative, right? It's not just all white guys who are farming.
Right.
There are Black people who have been, involved in this endeavor from the beginning.
Right.
And I just wanted to remind people of that fact. And with this book, We Are Each Other's Harvest, it was the same thing. I'll tell you, Monica, when I started working on this book, I was so uncertain because, again, it was just an impulse, right? It was like, I think I want to tell this story, but this time with the real people. But when I started thinking about my emotional experience of Black people and Black farming and that richness, I knew I could not express it. I'm not a historian, so I could not do it just, a straight history. So I thought, how can I do this in a way that is going to express all of the things that I am feeling about these people, right? And I knew it had to be through the narratives, but through art and poetry and photography and all these things, because that was the only way I could make sense of it for myself. But so to answer your question, going back to what advice do I have for young writers who want to write about this? It's just trust that impulse that is leading you forward and see where it takes you.
I would agree. And I would add, ask the question, who are your co-creators? Right?
Totally.
I mean, I feel like you have a personal history with farmers, farming, and you saw a side that you wanted to share, but you also viscerally probably felt that this was the story that needed to be told. And so I feel like, for me, it came from the food movement. It was Baba Malik Yakini in Detroit who taught me everything I know about food sovereignty, food security. And so, it was in trying to figure out the movement, but what the movement needed, which is where Freedom Farmers was birthed. So I love using all forms, right? I love poetry. I love the personal stories. I love the first person, and the way that you so beautifully craft diverse, right? Because I think that we have a tendency to singly capture one stereotype. And you're like, okay, there are farmers in the North and farmers in the South. They're young and, older elders. I mean, so you try to really capture in this book such a beautiful image of who farmers are that I think, in addition to the stories that they tell, also show the vast range of who's growing food.
And you know what else I'm going to add to that? I think as storytellers, as writers, whether it's through the fiction, my door, or through your door, I think we stand in this very interesting position where we are outside of this, and so we can see it, right? And I've been thinking about this a lot lately, because I think, for all the farmers who are getting up every day, getting out to their fields, whether they're urban or rural, they're thinking about, like, what do I have to do today, right? They're not thinking about the narrative of what they're doing. They're not thinking about the story of their lives. And I think the beauty of what you and I are able to do is we are able to stand just slightly apart from that and make sense of it and wrap our arms around it. That's just what I think.
Yes. And Bell Hooks uses a term called outsider within. And so when I was in grad school, it really captured how I was in the academy, but not really. And so I think our approach is we both have farming stories and we're connected to that. And our reality was that we knew there was something, there was something else, another part that needed to be told. I think it's important for us to tell how we met. I have to tell you if I can't tell you how many times I dreamt about meeting you. And I was telling everybody, I was like, if somebody knows, Natalie, please. I mean, at least it was in my head. I'm sure in my head, we were BFFs, and it just really felt so connected to you and to your view. And it was the beautiful Gabrielle Carter, preservationist of Food Box, North Carolina, who was like, y'all need to be connected.
Hats off to Gabrielle. Absolutely. Absolutely. And, I felt that same thing. But like I said, when I saw you in conversation, and I was like, who is this woman? And I had heard your name, Monica. I had heard your name like in the wind, but that was my first sighting of you. And then, of course, I knew of Freedom Farmers, and I got the book. And what I love about the way you write about farmers, and there's, I'm going to just quote you here.
Girl, I got one for you too. I was going to surprise you.
There is this moment where you say, Freedom Farmers charts a new narrative. It asks the question, if pain was all there was, how can we explain the indigenous roots of the current urban farming movement, spearheaded by Black people? And then you go on and you ask these questions. And when I read that, I was like, this is a fellow traveler. This is a sister of mine. I've got to meet her. So thank you, Gabrielle, if you're listening.
Yes, please. I'd like to share with you something that really sort of grabbed my heart. And I think you say it in terms of speaking specifically in writing Queen Sugar, but I think it's something that's really just really embedded in your work more broadly. You wrote, in writing Queen Sugar, I wanted to tell the story of a Black farming family like the one from which I descended. The novel was my attempt to stop the clock, to remind readers that Black people have always had a deep connection to the land. I wanted to celebrate farming as a noble endeavor and encourage readers to continue to pass their family's land down through generations. Queen Sugar is a declaration that Black land matters. And that struck a chord, because of course my conclusion was Black land matters. I was like, can you make this up? You can't make it up.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Again, I think you and I are really connected on this journey to elevate these stories and just wonderful people, you know?
Fulfilling the narrative. I mean, you know, as I said, I think people think they know everything about Black farmers. And I think that our job has been, you think you know, but you really don't know.
You don't know. Yes.
You know, and so we offer sort of these series of counter stories. And I will tell you that as an academic writer, someone who heard the work of folks like Reverend Paris, who says you can free yourself when you can feed yourself. And I didn't see that in the literature. And I had a really difficult time in the publishing of Freedom Farmers because I had to convince folks who didn't hear what I heard, even though I felt like I had receipts.
Yeah.
So I feel like there is the danger of the single story, which really has captured how we tell the work of Black farmers that has been an unfair telling of history. And I think if there's anything that I would say to students or young folks, people who are writing, is to sort of listen to what's there, but also pay attention to what's missing. Because I had a graduate student, when I first came to Madison, who said, I gave a keynote, and then the title was Black Farmers. And he said, he's from Maryland, and he said, when I heard Black farmers, I couldn't even conjure up an image.
See, that's terrible. Yeah.
And I feel like in the short time that I've been here, I now truly believe that folks can, have images of who Black farmers are. Yes. We've heard voices of Black farmers. We've complicated that narrative. And I wonder if you could share any particular stories that you just want to elevate, either in this book or in some of your travels. Are there stories or sides or perspectives that you would like to share with us today?
Boy, I mean, there's so many. Honestly, every farmer I met on this journey said something, had offered insights that just blew my mind and also made me tear up, you know, and really just want to embrace them. Yeah. Okay, so let me think of some examples. The Nelsons, okay, in Sondheimer, Louisiana. This is a family, there's 7 kids in all. 3 girls and 4 boys, and the 4 boys, who are actually men, I mean, they're sons. They are ranging in age from 28 up to early 40s, and they farm with their dad, and they are 4th and 5th generation Black farmers. Wow! And when I met, and just to show you the contrast in their experience, but when I was talking to them, they told this story. Mr. Nelson started out telling this story of how his great-great-grandfather, after enslavement, worked to acquire land. And on the day that the man made his last payment, the white guy who he was making these payments to, said to him, "Too bad, I'm not going to let you have this land," right? And so this man's whole life had been spent trying to work to acquire property. Right. He left, his brother left, and they eventually migrated from Mississippi to Louisiana. Okay, that's the way that story starts, okay? But then I was talking to Mr. Nelson, and then I was talking to his sons, who are amazing. These guys are young, ambitious, talented, strategic, clear-eyed about what needs to be done, and unapologetic, and fierce. Yeah. And when they talked about their vision as farmers and where they are trying to go and what they are able to do, with the resources that they have, and then what they could do if they had access to more capital, for example. I just love these guys because they see themselves in the future and they know what they're doing. Yeah. And they are so proud and humble at the same time. Yeah. Right. Sure. So that's just one example. I think of Melanie Edwards, who is this young Black woman who was farming up off the coast of Seattle on Whidbey Island. And talk about filling in the gaps, right? I came across Melanie on Instagram, and she had this she was holding this beet the size of her head.
Wow.
And I was like, what is this? And I reached out to her, and she was leaving Whidbey Island to go up to Alaska to farm school, right? And so when I interviewed Melanie for the book, I flew up to Alaska to spend time with her.
Wow.
But these are just two examples of multi-generations. Melanie discovered that she had farming in her family and didn't know it, right? Yeah. And actually got into food and growing when she didn't really feel like she couldn't figure out what her place was. And that's kind of the story she tells. Every story, every person I spoke to in this book has a story like that, right? Where they either were born into it or they found their way into it, but they all have a vision for what they are trying to do. And so I could go on, but those are just two examples.
Yeah. What I love about your two examples, one is you talk about land as healing.
Yes.
And in thinking about sort of a post-COVID, whatever that is, right? What I'm hearing a lot of organizations that are talking about a Black to the land kind of a framework, right? Black folks that are interested in both returning to our agricultural roots, but also going to the outdoors to reconnect with, just as a part of a healing. And so I love your example and sort of talking about, and several examples in your book, you talk about how the land has saved people, have given, a mission, a cause, a reason, and what have you. And I think one of the things that I, would like for maybe you to share, of all the ways that you heard all the different farmer stories, how did you decide how are you connected to folks? I wonder if you could share that with us.
Okay, so how did I connect to folks? Some people I found on my own, right? Melanie, for example. The dynamic, Leah Pennyman and Naima Pennyman and what they're doing at Soulfire. Yeah. I was just kind of digging around, and then I came across Farming While Black, and I was like, what is this? What is this?
Game changer.
Right? Like a whole manual of step by step how to do this thing. Yeah. And so I reached out to Leah. I just came across my original Instagram message to her almost 2 years ago saying, I'm working on this book and I'd love to come and see you, and flew up there. Talk about transformative work, right? Yeah. That day that I spent with Leah and her husband, Jonah, and all of the young people on Soulfire Farm, my mind was blown. And then Naima recited a poem at lunch, and I was like, I'm done. You gotta be in this book, please,
And they ended up on the cover.
They ended up on the cover because they represent so much of what you and I, again, Monica, are trying to say, which is, let's think about this differently, right? This is not an old story. This is a story that we have been telling that deserves to continue to be told, and they embody that. So some people I met on my own, and then others, it was kind of like the way you and I met. You meet somebody and they say, oh, you need to meet this person, right? And then that person says, oh, you need to meet this person. And so, honestly, my only regret was that I could not include all the people who I really have met since. Wow. I could still easily be working on this book to include all of the voices and the visionaries and the farmers who I have met since I turned in the manuscript. So,
and we're going to talk about what's next a little later. But one of the things that I learned, I'm raised in Detroit. Family, we were my family was part of the migration. But one of the things that I was so pleasantly surprised by was there were several times when MapQuest or Google, whatever map I was using failed on me in the middle of somewhere, usually Mississippi, around Mr. Burkett's. Right? So I would, if I had a signal, I remember one time I got lost. My signal wasn't, and I reached out to MJ, Mr. Burkett's nephew, also a farmer. And so I was asking him, I was like, okay, well, I'm lost. And so he says, tell me what you see.
Right.
And when I described to him what I saw, it was like I was describing to him his own artwork. Yeah. And the ways that he described to me, he's like, on the left, it's going to bend a little, you're going to turn and feel this, and then it's now I'm a city girl. I need a street. I need something real obvious, and a fire hydrant ain't gonna work.
Yeah,
so,
totally get that.
In the city, I wasn't raised to understand the land and the way that he saved me. Got me from where I was to, and I couldn't believe. He says, "Okay, now," he didn't know how fast I was driving. He's like, "Okay, so by now you should begin to see as such." And I was just, it was like a movie. It was like he was telling me the movie that I was seeing in my eyes through the phone. So I wonder, what did you learn about farmers? What did you learn about Black farmers? What were some of the things that you learned that before this part, that was different or new or shifted? In addition to the Penniman sisters, what were some of the other ways that doing this work changed your frame of thinking about Black farmers?
I think, first of all, like you said, just that comfort with the earth, just that. Okay, I'll let me put it this way. In fiction, right? Oftentimes, and I love books that are about place. So the power of place is very important to me. And when I have taught about the power of place, I often say that, characters don't just exist with, against a backdrop, right? A static backdrop. They are interacting with the place, and they are often, you feel your goal as a writer is to make sure that it's like they have to come up through the landscape, right? And that's the way I feel about Black farmers. And that is the way I felt in this book. And I don't know that I had that experience. I mean, I had it a little bit with Queen Sugar, right? But frankly, there's so few Black sugarcane farmers.
Yeah.
But with this book, when you are walking the land with a farmer,
come on now,
and he is on his land, right? That is a powerful experience, right? When you have a farmer who can tell you what time it is, not because he looks at his watch, but because he can stand there and he knows where the sun is and where the sun falls and what the shadow is.
Oh no.
I mean, I get chills thinking about that, right?
Me too.
And so for me, it is that kind of deep knowledge, right? That I really came to have even more of an appreciation for. And it is just a knowing the soil, knowing the weather, knowing if it's going to rain, knowing, and the flexibility that is required in that, these are some of the things that I experienced with these farmers, and also the innovation, right?
Yes.
Because a lot of this, farmers have to be innovative.
Yes.
They have to be creative.
That's right.
And I was inspired by that because I could relate, right? I could relate to, okay, for me, it's like the blank page. Oh my God, right?
Yeah.
But for them, it's the field, right? And what does that look like?
Our canvases, right?
Exactly. Right. And taking that leap of faith.
That's right.
You know it. You know what it's like to sit down and have to think, okay, I've got this idea. How am I going to make this work on paper? And they are doing the same thing. So there is creativity involved in this.
Yeah.
And that's all.
Do you know one of the things that I know I didn't hear a lot about before I started writing Freedom Farmers. And I really feel took center role in Queen Sugar. And I'm really curious where it came from. When you were talking about the collectives and the cooperatives, you know, and so in Queen Sugar, like that plays a really important role. And as I mentioned, my friend Dara Cooper says, individually, we are vulnerable, collectively, we have power. So I'm wondering where the influence came through in, you know, talking about the collectives and the cooperatives, because you know, in my own work on Black farmers, on the one hand, they're fiercely independent, as in they need to be their own boss. But the beauty of the ways that they, you know, sort of reach out, and one person may be an expert on an engine, and the next person may be, you know, expert in this, in the seed, and somebody else. And this whole sort of shared communal is not something that gets a lot of attention. So I'm really curious where that came from for you.
You know, I can remember working, like when I was working on Queen Sugar, for example, and talking to Cleveland Provost, who was, he's Prosper Denton in the novel. And, you know, again, just the ingenuity that he had to like fix equipment if it needed to be fixed. And he knew so much. And then he was telling me, I remember him telling me once about, he had like a piece of equipment that broke or something, like during the harvest, right? When you are like on the clock working 24 hours a day to get in that sugarcane crop. And another farmer came and helped him harvest his crop and brought his own machinery, right? And I think that was the first inkling I had of this sense of community and how farmers are watching out for each other and will step in and lend a hand. That's probably my first real understanding of what it takes. And then you step back from that and you think about, you know, Booker T. Whatley and the whole CSA movement, right? And that sense of community. And so I don't know. I mean, again, it's hard for me to pinpoint some of these things, but when you ask that question, that's what I think of. And I want to turn it around and ask the same of you. Like, what do you think?
What do I think?
Yeah, like, how did you come to that awareness about community and farmers doing things differently than we often assume?
Sure. So part of it came through the work of the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network. And there were several moments where when I was moving back to Detroit to care for my parents, that's where I'm from. And so I knew I needed a research topic, a conversation, and I had heard about this urban ag movement in Detroit, excuse me, but I also didn't see people who looked like me. And I knew my family been growing food in Detroit forever. So, you know, through the work with the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network, I started hearing and thinking about food as resistance. So it's like, okay, well, the discipline, right? Sociology says protest marches and boycotts. But Black folks in Detroit are talking about food as a strategy. And so what does that mean? And so learning from and sitting at their feet for 2 years before I asked any research questions, I just wanted to understand why and what was happening and how do we. And so what was very clear was that this wasn't just an isolated moment in history, that there have been other historical moments when Black folks have turned to agriculture as a strategy of resistance and resilience. And so BBCFSN sent me out to go get the question, like get the research, bring it back to us so we can use this. And so the beauty of that was, I was like, well, my original book was going to be on Detroit. And then, you know, the tenure track and, you know, we got to make some decisions. I can talk about Detroit as a case study, but what I really thought we needed was a way to understand how agriculture has been used by Black folks historically and who are the Black intellectual traditions who might offer us 100 years ago a different lens to understand why agriculture is important. So quickly through the work of the Federation of Southern Cooperatives, listening to the ways that they were talking about establishing cooperatives, both as an economic model in response to poverty, but also as a strategy of resistance and resilience, it became very clear that this was a story about our history that we have very little information about. And so it was an organizational approach that I took in Freedom Farmers because I wanted folks to understand that there's a lot we can do individually, but yet again, we are vulnerable, but we have tremendous power collectively. What does that power allow us to do? And how might we really think differently about redesigning food systems and not saying who can afford to be healthy, but giving the, recognition to centuries of Black folks who've labored in the land. I just couldn't believe that the story that I heard, that you heard, I didn't hear that in the scholarship. And so, it just took us we were like, oh, okay, there's a missing story.
Exactly. There's an opportunity there, right? There's a story to be told. And I want to pause for a minute and really reflect on something that you have just said. And that is about the intellectual tradition. And you write about that in Freedom Farmers. And again, I think this is one of those things that is missing from the narrative when we think about Black farmers, right? There is a rich intellectual history and tradition that goes into this. It goes from the innovation, right? All the farmers who created like farm implements, right? I had, when I was with Stanley Hughes and Linda Leach in North Carolina, and they were talking about historically, all of the farm implements that were created by Black people out of necessity, right?
That's right.
Like one of them is, they talk about how when you're planting tobacco and you have to sit low to the ground in order to either plant it or whatever. And so Black folks invented this tobacco plant.
I was going to scooch. Was it a scooch?
Right. And where you're being pulled by this tractor and you're plugging, you're planting these things, but you have to sit low.
Right.
And then you start to think, how many of these innovations created by Black folks out of necessity end up being sold, by equipment manufacturers, right?
That's right.
You really start to unpack this, and you start to realize how much intellectual energy has been invested in this work.
Right.
How much innovation goes into that. And you talk about that in Freedom Farmers. And so I just appreciate that, because I think part of the narrative also today is this idea of what does success look like? Yeah. And I was actually on a call last week with the folks at Cornell and their project. And there was a young Black woman who was on that call who has an advanced degree. And she was saying, so often it's hard to convince people that farming is successful, right? And because I was saying, look, you've got this advanced degree and you're applying all of this knowledge to what you are doing. Not that you need an advanced degree, but I'm saying it's this idea that, again, it's about shifting the narrative about who is farming and what that work requires, right? Anyway.
Yes, I love it. And I think, there's a part of both of us who feel I think, I'm not trying to speak for you, correct me, like they say, rescue me if I'm wrong in the church. But one of the things I think is really sort of fascinating, and I talk about it as Sankofa, like looking back to move forward. I think what you and I are both doing in similar ways is we're unearthing our own rich agricultural history as Black people and offering that to this generation and the future generation, because I feel like what we're really trying to do is we're trying to complicate the narrative. We're trying to really, and these conversations of the genius of Black farmers. I mean, we can even think about how many inventions George Washington Carver created for agriculture and didn't even get the patents on them. So, when people talk about Black farmers and we mute the innovation, the genius, the skill, the labor, and all of that, I feel like it's discouraging. And I think what's important is that we're elevating that as a way to sort of connect future generations who won't have to hear the same stories that we heard. Then begin to think about themselves as producers, or at least even, thinking about how do we go back to return land, as we both see folks who have air property in the northern areas and, are returning to the South. So I feel like, could you speak a little bit about just how do you see younger farmers sort of connecting with your work, or have you heard them talk about what your work has done in terms of how they view the future of farming?
Yeah. Well, and again, it was so invigorating to be with young people who see this work with a real, like through the lens of often activism and innovation. And they're not waiting around, Monica. They're not waiting. And that is inspiring to me because I think, you know, my generation is still a little bit of a generation that doesn't necessarily ask for permission, but, you know, we're like the A students, right? We want to just check all the boxes and do everything right. And what I loved about the energy, I'm thinking of Kamal Bell, for example, and Sankofa Farms that, you know, in North Carolina. Yeah. This young man has a vision for what he's trying to do with that land. And he's like in his 30s, right? He's young himself. Yeah. And yet part of his mission is he's a beekeeper. And he takes his bees and he's got a training program on his farm for young Black men to do beekeeping and farming. And he goes to Durham and he, you know, to some neighborhoods. And he's trying to pull these young men out of Durham, out into the open space, right? And learning these practices. And he's doing it and he's not asking permission. And I just crack up when I think about Kamal's story, because part of what he talks about is, you know, how he knew. So Kamal studied up when he was applying for his loan and his grant or whatever. Okay. He like did all of his research in advance because he knew the history, right? He knew what Black farmers had been through. And he was like, oh no, we're not going to have this, right? And he came in there and just like beat these people up with all of the knowledge that he had, and he was prepared. And now he is paying that forward. So that's one example. And today I was actually thinking about another way that young people can think about agriculture. And there's a young woman out here in San Francisco. Her name is Julia Collins. And she has started a company called Earth. What is Julia's company called? I wrote it down here. Planet Forward. Okay. Now, Julia has never farmed a day in her life. She's out here in San Francisco where, you know, ground zero for technology, right? Yeah. But she is doing a startup where she is producing food from farmers who have regenerative and sustainable agriculture practices. Okay. So this is a young woman who is bringing all of her entrepreneurial skills. Yeah. He is pulling in the farmers because that's who she is sourcing her ingredients from. Yeah. And she is in the marketplace, right? Wow. And so it's a different way of thinking. So my whole point is when we talk about agriculture and farming and all of this, let's be creative. And let's, because there's some people, you know, and I understand it. I understand, you know, Black folks, young Black people who are like, I want to be in computer science, right? Or I want to be in tech. Fine. Or I want to be an entrepreneur. But you can be an entrepreneur and still be connected to agriculture. And Julia Collins is an example of somebody who is using all of the latest you know, technology and everything else, but she's reaching into her community and sourcing it that way. So I was just reading about her today and want to.
You know what I love about that example is that we know farmers who suffer from the digital divide in the rural areas in terms of technology. What amazing synergy between our young folks that are tech savvy connecting. Okay, we got to talk about that. Put a pin in that because we got to come back to that. I'm really super excited about that. I you know. In the last 5 years, we have witnessed some really beautiful scholarship. I'm thinking of Natasha Bowen's The Color of Food. I'm thinking of Leah Penniman's work. I'm thinking about Ashante Reese's work on Black food geographies. I feel like this is, and all of these sisters who have written these beautiful pieces also had forwards written by other Black women, right? These are Black women authors writing about food, and it's just such beautiful ways. I wonder if you can tell me, like, who are the Black farmers, who are the Black authors, who are the activists that get you excited about what's happening right now in terms of Black agriculture? In addition, I mean, there may be some book that you want to write.
Let me look at my list. So they're not necessarily all authors, but they are Black women who I have crossed paths with, who I am inspired by. And this is just a brief list. Of course, Leah and Naima Pennyman. Doria Robinson.
I love Doria.
Of Urban Tilth out here in Richmond, and what she is doing. I mean, just amazing, amazing work. Karen Washington, right?
On my list.
Karen Washington, who brings such soulfulness and such a big heart and so much wisdom, right, to this community and to this endeavor. And she's another one. I heard about Karen Washington's name forever before I met her. And I was like, I've got to meet Mama Kay. I've got to meet this woman, because she's like one of the matriarchs.
Right, right. Don't be surprised if bugs cause, might have to give them your phone number for one of the conference of the Black Farmers Urban Gardeners.
It would be my honor.
Well,
but I heard about bugs even before I heard about bugs when I was writing Queen Sugar. And I was like, okay, I got to put a pin in that. I've got to figure out what that's all about. There's a young woman out here in the Bay Area. Her name is Moretta Brown. And she works with the Berkeley Basket CSA, right? She's interesting because she's a queer woman of color and has this whole idea about queer ecology. Fascinating, fascinating work. And so she's in the book, right? I wanted to include her story. Angela McKee Brown, who is, she works at the Edible Schoolyard here in the Bay Area. So she's helping Alice Waters, but she is a young Black woman who is like helming that project, right? So those are, and then I have Julia on the list. So those are just some of the Black women who I so appreciate and admire.
I wonder. Oh my goodness. I mean, I think the authors that I'm inspired by, I mentioned, but I absolutely have Karen Washington on there. LaDonna Redmond in Minneapolis is doing incredible work around organizing cooperatives. I think about Tefera Rushton, sister from Detroit. This was the first interview I wept. And the reason that I cried, I was just sort of asking questions about, just what are the ways that she uses the growing space to demonstrate or to talk about agency. And so in the interview, we're in a restaurant on just sort of off in a corner. And I'm asking her questions like, what do you think some of the lessons that children, let me back up just a bit and say that she lived on a block that it was a vacant lot and the grass was really tall. And, folks were avoiding the grass and, just sort of not engaging, just walking away from it. And she said, one day I just woke up and said, I'm tired of this. She went out there, she cut the grass, she pamphleted the neighborhood and said, hey, we're going to have this growth space. A few years later, this space that once people avoided is now a place where artwork is and music and, there's food produced and, just intergenerational energy. So one of the questions I asked her was, what do you think the students, the children learn? And so she sat there for a moment and she kind of paused and she said, when I asked the kids what they wanted to grow, she said, it was important for me to do exactly what they asked because I needed them to hear that their voice had power. Their voice has power. So when they come back and they see, I wanted the tomatoes there and there they are. And right, just to imagine in my head what the kids were thinking or what it must have felt like to have that kind of example. And we sat there and we cried, child, we cried. And it was just like, okay, I'm supposed to be a researcher. I knew it wasn't possible for me to do this and be detached. But it's like these kinds of stories about the ways that we connect to the earth, to heal ourselves, to heal our community, And I feel like in this moment, we need to seriously be thinking about community self-determination, community self-reliance, and mutual aid. I wonder if you have any ideas on the ways that the work of these farmers can sort of create a path for our healing, our collective healing.
Okay, before I do, I have to add 2 more names to our list.
Okay, who?
Gail Myers.
Of course, Gail's my homie. I just saw Gail. No,
Gail Myers.
I'm flipping.
Gail Myers.
Oh, salt of the earth.
Who used to be out here in Oakland.
That's right.
Who moved to North Carolina.
That's right.
She's another one. Everybody's like, you got to meet Gail Myers.
Got to meet Gail.
I met Gail.
Yes.
And also Conda Mason.
Of course, Conda. Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Conda Mason is another one.
Absolutely.
Is bringing all of that.
Come on now.
Power and energy and like,
we're on the cusp of something really beautiful. Yes.
Yeah. So I just had to add those 2.
Sure. And there's a lot of other people whose names escape me. Of course, we can't think about this work without Mrs. Sherrod's legacy. Like there's so many people. Mrs. Hamer's. I mean, there's just so many people. Yes. Okay,
Powerful women. Okay, so now the question of healing. Oof. Okay, tell me the question again.
It wasn't on your list. I snuck that one in. No, it just came from because I feel like there's a theme. I think there's a critical moment, and there's a theme in your work and my work that talks about contrary to people's assumption that Black folks don't do these things, right? We dismiss that. And now we're recognizing and elevating the ways in which we do. And so I wonder if you can talk about, like, I hear the conversation. It is not muted. It's above ground. The ways that we connect to the land to heal.
Totally.
And so I wonder if in terms of both mutual aid, personal healing, what ideas do you have in terms of what you've heard from Black farmers and both individual healing, collective healing, and collective care and love?
Okay, so let me start here. I'll start with one of the stories in the book. The last people I profile in the book are Merton Bellamy and Kelly Walker, okay? They are not, they come from farmers, but they are not farmers. They are landowners and land stewards. They were inspired to buy a farm in Virginia, in Heathsville, Virginia, okay, right on the Chesapeake Bay. Kelly is an attorney, Wharton is a consultant. And they bought a 100-acre farm, okay? Because what they understood, and I understand that this is not everybody, but this is a Black couple who had the resources to do this. But here's what they did. First of all, they understood that Black people need space, right? And this is and their story in the book is called Home Games. And they say that they talk about the fact that so many of us spend our days in these environments where we are not on our home turf, right? We are in our work environments, maybe even where we have chosen to live. They are not spaces that are really where we can really claim and take up space. And so what that means for us psychologically is that we spend a lot of time feeling like not quite on the defensive. I don't want to say that, but we are not at peace, at like that deep peace. And so they talk about them understanding that they realized they needed space. They needed to be able to look out across land that they owned and to know that they could walk on that land, they could raise their kids on that land, they can have their friends come out and enjoy the peace and solitude, right? And they have named their farm Freedom Farm because that is the way they feel when they are on that land, right? And then they discovered that there was a Black woman, an enslaved woman named Venus, on that same land. When they did the historical research, And so there's a little bridge somewhere on their farm, and they named it Venus's Bridge.
Wow.
And then they are leasing their farm to a Black farmer who is farming that land. And so it's like the full circle, right?
Right. Yes.
So what I appreciate about their story is this idea that I think we as people of Black people have, especially the products of the Great Migration. I'm in San Francisco, from Los Angeles. You're based, you're from Detroit, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm not bashing urban environments. I'm not saying that. Mm-hmm. But I am saying that it is important for us to understand what it means to heal ourselves by being in spaces where we can like stretch out our arms and we can enjoy the quiet, right? White folks get this because white folks are in nature all the time, hiking, right?
Yeah.
There is something about communing with nature that can be deeply healing. And there's Karen Washington talks about this. The first time she ate a tomato that she planted.
Come on now.
And what that did to her understanding of food and the power of growing something and knowing where that came from.
That's right.
So this is again what farming means. My mother gets out in her garden, and she's got a flower garden, and she's like crazy. She's got a flower garden, and she's got a garden in the back. She gets out there, and I know it's for therapeutic. It is her meditation, right?
Yes.
And so, to answer your question, whether you've got some flower pots, or a backyard garden, or an urban farm or a rural farm, I think we both want people to understand that there is peace of mind that comes with that communing with nature and communing with the soil. So
So one of the things that what you said made me think of was Mrs. Hamer said, she told us not to leave the South. She said, don't leave the land. Everything comes from the land. Yes. And I think it wasn't until hearing the ways that Black people are connecting to the land for both spiritual healing, right? And in a broad sense, that I really began to understand everything comes from the land. So that, not just everything, but everything. Right? Right? Yeah. I do want to take a quick second just to hold up the book as a little commercial break to say, please do yourself a favor. You need to get this book. It would be great if you support independent booksellers like Charis. Please support independent booksellers and buy this book. I also want to let folks know that we are going to take some questions and answers. And so please populate our little question board so that we can get to those questions. I'll do my best to get to your questions. But before we take the questions, I'm curious. Two things. What is next for you? The book is already just everywhere. Folks are talking about it in really beautiful ways. It is so worth people's time and energy, and to check out, some of the other events that you have planned. But what are you working on next? What's next for you?
Oh boy. Well, I really want to see, this book find its way into the world. So in the most immediate sense, these days it's just having these conversations. But next, I'm working to develop, I'm probably saying this too soon because we don't have nothing's in stone yet, but I really want to continue to try to tell these stories, right? Yeah. And tell them cinematically. Mm-hmm. And so my goal, because honestly, Monica, when I was working on this book, I kept saying to myself, people need to hear these voices, and we need to tell these stories. And so I'm in the early stages of working with my co-creator and a wonderful producer named Trevitt Willis, who's there in Atlanta, on developing a docuseries called Harvest that will tell the stories of people of farmers of color, right? Yeah. Black farmers, but also Latinx farmers, Native American farmers, Asian farmers, really across the spectrum. So it's kind of like it's the book, but it's also a takeoff on the book, and it's bigger. So we're running.
I love it. I love it. I want folks to really sort of check out some of the energy that's happening in the chat room. There are all kinds of references that are happening there that deal with Black farmers. So I encourage folks, if you're excited about the work that this new book, there's so much out here that I think in the chat that would be. And so I think that folks should check that out. Was there anything that I didn't ask you that you'd like to share?
You know, I think we've really had a wide-ranging conversation. I love, being able to talk about how we met, and we're new friends, but I feel like we're old friends. Yeah. And, I'm good. I'm ready to open it up to questions. I also have to shout out to one person who I saw, Shay Youngblood, okay. So this is on the fiction side, but Shay wrote a beautiful novel years ago called Black Girl in Paris. That it's just a beautiful, beautiful novel, and I have optioned it with the idea of trying to bring this to the screen. So I've let that cat out of the bag, and it's really early. But anyway. It's a beautiful novel, so at least buy the novel, and hopefully, we'll see it in film form.
Yes, I see a few questions. One I already asked, but I do have a question for you. Were there, in terms of what you wrote, were there parts of the screen of the television version of Queen Sugar, just in terms of the difference between the book and the show? I mean, were there parts that, got you excited? Are there parts, you were like, oh, wow, they picked up on that? Sometimes when you hear your work through the lens of other people, it's always like, oh, wow, they got it. I didn't expect, right? So I'm wondering, were there any of those moments that you have? I'm sure.
So many, especially I'd say in the first 2 or 3 seasons when, they were still kind of closely adhering to the book, but they'd already gone off and done other stories.
Yeah.
So last night I was catching up on Queen Sugar.
Yep.
Lying on the couch, watching season 5. And, to me, 2 things. There's a scene from the book where Charlie goes to a farm auction, okay? And she is with Prosper Denton. And Charlie is she thinks she knows everything, and she's getting ahead of herself, and she's just making a mess for everybody, right?
Yeah.
And she ends up really almost ruining, undercutting, Prosper's efforts, and he's brought all this wisdom and strategy to this auction. And I remember when I saw a version of that in the series, and I was like, okay, because every farmer knows that experience of going to an auction, and it's not often, a positive thing, because it usually means that some farmer has gone out of business, right?
Yeah.
But to see that they had picked up on that scene was just, I was like, okay. Because it's a real thing, right?
It is a real thing. There was a part where Prosper, at least in Queen Sugar, where there was this conversation about him losing the land, and you were like, and you were pretty clear that he was going to lose the land, and he was not leaving.
Right.
And I think what I love about the way the show, like, it says a lot without saying everything. Yeah. And I just am so excited and cannot wait to see all the beauty that comes through these images, because I think it's one thing to read the stories and to hear about the people. It's another thing to see the wholeness and fullness that is who they are and what they do. And so I'm really looking forward to what you have next.
Thank you. Thank you.
So,
Thank you.
Yes. So we have just a few questions. If there are other folks with some questions, please don't sit back. Come on in and join the party. There's one, how did you find the farmers in your book? I feel like you described that. Mm-hmm. There's another question from Tiana that says, how do we historicize the importance of Black land with the knowledge that Black land operates on a settler state? How did you both separate the quest for Black land as not a project of Black capitalism? Rather, do we see these quests for Black land as distinct from projects of Black capitalism? All right, what do you think?
I understand that question, and it's something that I grapple with.
Yeah.
And because I feel like there are two realities here, right? We have to confront the fact that all of us are on, unless you are Native American, unless you are indigenous, we all are on stolen land, right? And we have to acknowledge that and find ways for Native people, indigenous people, farming or otherwise, to have access to the land that was stolen from them, right? So I hold that in one hand. In the other hand, I hold the reality that for Black people, we are suffering from generations of disenfranchisement, right?
Dispossession, that's right.
Dispossession.
That's right.
And that has to be acknowledged, right? When you look at some of the statistics, and I'll think about, for example, the fact that, the average white household has something like 8 to 13 times the wealth of a Black household, right? So there are economic realities where we have been locked out of, whether you want to call it the capitalist system, whatever. There are ways that Black people historically have not had access to be able to build their communities and to be able to pass something on. So I hold these things simultaneously. And the thing that gives me hope is to look at, again, going back to these young folks, the way they have found a way to integrate these two realities, right? These two facts. And they see themselves as land stewards.
Yeah.
They are building community with other BIPOC farmers. They are working together, and everybody is advancing together. And I think that is really going to be the solution, right?
Sure.
So you have that, and then you have opportunities for, other people to extend themselves and let a Black farmer, if you have land that's in your family and you're not doing anything with it, reach out to a young Black farmer and let them have that land, right? Not give it away to them, but let them farm on it and keep the profit. I don't want to get into the whole
right. Yeah.
But there are modern ways to allow people to make a living and work in community.
Sure. And my answer to Tiana's question is capitalism won't save us.
Exactly.
Right. And the reality that there are ranges and ways that I think that ownership is a different question than access and stewardship. Right.
Yes.
And so from the indigenous, the question in the conversation is, how can you own something that doesn't belong to you?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
You can't own land and does not belong to us.
Yes.
So therefore, young folks are coming up with creative strategies and ways to sort of think about that. So ownership is one side. And I think that, we hear about land trusts.
Yes, exactly.
And so for me, I feel like it's really important for us to think about collective and communal. In other words, how do we make decisions about what we share, right? If we share the soil, it's not just what you put in the soil is yours, right? That soil, what you put in there, it ends up in the environment. And so how do we collectively make decisions about how we use it and how we share it and how we benefit from it? I feel like that's an important component of it. And so I think that, yes, while there are lots of folks that talk ownership, I feel like the movement folks are really talking about stewardship and collective, and also building alliances across, just racial and ethnic categories in terms of Black, Indigenous, and Latinx folks, and really sort of thinking about how do we respond to climate, mitigate? How do we respond to that? How do we make sure that, while everybody else was looking at, COVID shelves as bare, that's something that we're, unfortunately, the food system has neglected us. And so really sort of thinking and hearing ways and that people are sort of coming up with some new strategies that really kind of get me excited. So I think that my answer to Tiana's question is really, asking the questions about a range of land stewardship and ownership across a different variety of strategies, not excluding land trusts and other ways that we have instituted to make sure that that is a part of a shared collective access and use.
Totally. Brilliantly said.
Much
better than mine.
All right, let's see. Someone said here, I may have missed this earlier, but how did you move from writing the book to the process of having it written for screen? And this is S. Hardwick, and I want to sort of have you answer that question, but then also tell us, what was the process between Queen Sugar and We Are Each Other's Harvest? What was that? Yeah.
Okay, so how did I move from, well, let me answer the second one first. How did I move from being a fiction writer to being a nonfiction writer?
Please.
The only way I could do it was first to remind myself that at the end of the day, I am a storyteller, right? If I started thinking of myself as a historian, Monica, I can't do what you do. I can't do it. I can't do that. You know, I love history. I love reading it. But to try to synthesize all of this information and to produce a history text, A, it would have taken me forever. B, I cannot do that kind of academic writing. I tried. That's why I got an MFA and not a PhD. Just saying, right? Because it has to come through me. It has to be my voice. I have to metabolize it differently. And so the only way I could do this book was to think of myself as a storyteller, let the historians do their job, right? So I reached out to the people who have that historical expertise, and I commissioned essays or things from them. And I really had to think of myself as, in some ways, a curator.
That's it. Yep.
Right?
I see it.
Assembling and compiling. And I was actually inspired by film, if you want to know the truth, right? There's some filmmakers, Khalil Joseph, who is amazing. Arthur Jaffa, amazing, right? Who do some things in film that are they're not multidisciplinary, but they are compilations. And I was so inspired by that. And I realized one day, that's what I'm trying to do here, right? With all of these different voices and poems and all this and photographs and poetry and all that. That's the only way I could do this book. Going back to your first question about what was it like to go from Queen Sugar the book to Queen Sugar the series, honestly, I wrote the book. I have nothing to do with writing the series, although, I gave them, advice and talked to them before season 1, but hats off to the writers, the Queen Sugar writers in the writer's room. I'm getting my experience with adaptation with my friend Shay Youngblood, whose novel I am, working very hard to adapt with the idea that will be on the screen. So that's where I'm really learning. And I'm going to tell you, it's tough. Right. It is really tough to bring the beauty in one form to another form. I think we're doing it, and I'm very proud. But it's its own thing. So
sure. What I love is you make a distinction between saying that you couldn't do what historians do, but the way you write it's palpable. Like my heart, like I literally feel like you write to where I'm placing myself right, and I'm seeing what so you are just incredible in, just doing this work. It's just such a beautiful thing to behold. And I think in the same way, as storytellers, we hear it and it literally comes through us.
Yes.
I can't tell you how many times in the archives I'd read something and I'd be overcome with emotion, one way or the other, either laughing out loud or bawling and sobbing. And so what I had to learn, which is not anything that they teach you in graduate school. They don't teach academics how to invoke energy and spirit. And so part of what I did was I went to Mrs. Hamer's resting place and I asked for permission to tell her story. I went to Tuskegee and I asked for permission to tell their stories. And I just feel like I feel the same way when I read your work. I feel the range of emotions and the stories you tell are so incredibly beautiful. So yes, what you're doing is what you should be doing, what you called to do, girl, because you're doing it. All right, let me get another question because I could keep all day. Oh, here's another question. In the film Concrete Cowboys, there's a historic reference to working Black cowboys that does not get developed. Arbors with food carts, actual farmers, and other important occupations are not brought to the screen. Is this something that gets developed in literature for Black farming futures? Is that something you can speak to? This is Skylark who's asked this question.
Well, okay, first of all, I have Black Concrete Cowboys on my watch list. I have not watched it yet, although I've seen the trailer. I'm not sure what she is saying there because I haven't watched the film yet.
Right. But
I will tell you, this is another one of these areas, these like pockets of history.
What'd you say, girl?
So let me just tell you, when I was debating about like what this book was going to be, I had an idea about telling the story of like Black, like rodeo, the Black rodeo and Black cowboys. Monica, I went to the granddaddy of Black cowboy like conferences in Houston.
Bananas.
Thousands.
What?
It was a trail ride. It was a trail ride with thousands of Black people on horseback.
Wow.
You want to talk about a story that needs to be told. And crazy. But this is, again, part of our history, right?
Yeah.
Connected to the land.
That's right.
That we have lost touch with.
That's right.
Right?
These are stories that we don't know.
They're stories that we don't know.
That's right.
And
to look on TV to watch to watch the rodeos and all those kinds of things, you'll see nobody Black, but even understanding the origin of quote cowboy.
Yes,
Black. I was like, how is this missing? Yes, somebody needs to write that. I don't know who's listening, but I just gave y'all something. I just gave you something. I just gave you.
I gave away a story idea just now. So
okay, we're not gonna charge you extra for that one. All right, let me get to the next question here. This is Jewel Pearson. Let's see here. I'm a tiny house dweller and believe an opportunity exists for Black tiny house dwellers looking for rental parking locations and Black farmers who are experiencing land loss due to finances for mutual cooperative communities to work in community and also in efforts to build generational wealth so needed in our community. You have any thoughts on this direction? This is from Jewel Pearson.
I mean, I get the tiny house thing, pre-COVID, I thought maybe I could do it, but that's some tight living. And I got a husband who needs to get up and go to work. He needs to get out of my workspace.
We need some space.
So I'm just saying, I'm just going to say, but, to the extent that I understood her question, I think, she's free and she can take that, her home and I mean, wouldn't it be ideal if she could like park that on land that Black folks own, or steward, or I don't know. I'm not so sure I understand exactly what she was asking, but that's because I'm so excited. And
right. I'm excited too. And here's what I'll say. I will say that some of the new things, the trends that the rest of the world is sort of getting super excited about, I think it fails to acknowledge in some ways. Like, I don't have anything against the tiny house and, they're part of my reclusive tendencies that probably would enjoy, but I just want a bunch of dogs and my own, just sort of see myself in that. But I think that we can't keep telling Black farmers, okay, here's something new, do this. Okay, here's a new idea, do this. I think what we really need to do is truly invest in a food system that pays the fair wage for the labor
Yes.
And for the environmental impact, I mean, just redesigning a food system so that these new, big, great, groovy ideas, you know, are not the solution, but the solution is rooted in what we already know, which is generations of knowledge of ag production, knowledge of the land, and working together, I feel like.
Totally. You know, okay, so I'll share a thought I had just today.
Sure.
You know how you can go to the grocery store and buy, you know, your certified organic produce, right?
Mm-hmm.
What if you could go to the store and buy produce that like was from like a Black farmer network,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
They're already doing the work.
Right.
They're already doing the work.
Right. Sure.
But, you know, unless you go to my knowledge, unless you go to a farmer's market, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you get that? Or unless you get a CSA box from a Black farmer,
right?
How can we tangibly support them?
Yes.
And I was just thinking today, I was like, you know, if there was like a Black farmer label, like there's a kosher label, right?
Okay.
If there was like a Black farmer label, I would buy that.
Look for Black farmer label.
Right? Right?
I just dated myself, but you get it. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
I know that song too.
Right.
But like a BIPOC farmer label.
Yeah. Yes.
That you could go to the store and you could see, oh, okay, I'm going to buy this one because this is from a BIPOC farmer.
What I would encourage you to look at the work of the Black Church Food Security Network, and the work of Reverend Eva Brown is doing really tremendous work in Baltimore, where it's his effort to make sure his congregants have access to nutrient-rich foods. But it's not just, I think a lot of people say, how can we buy from Black farmers, right? And so, working with my friend LaDonna Redmond, we got Mr. Burkett's watermelon into our cooperative, and Miss Barbara's blueberries, right? And I do think that there are organizations, the Federation of Southern Cooperatives and the Alliance, National Black Food and Justice Alliance, that are sort of thinking about futuristically, what does a Black food system look like that connects, right, communities and what have you. And there's some really exciting work that's going on there. And I also think that in addition to a label, I feel like it's important for us to in our own spheres of influence, right? And so if I'm a university faculty member, I can ask questions about where we're sourcing. I can ask for us to think differently. When I have a program, I can ask the question of how might we support some of the farmers locally who produce, and I feel like that there's a unique opportunity that exists here, and thinking about within our spheres of influence individually, but in our organizations, in our occupations, and all these kinds of things. And I think one of the important sort of things to think about is that, contrary to what dietitians, nutritionists often say, is the reason for food inaccessibility or just, for diet related illnesses is because of decision. And we know that that's not it. It's a structural problem that is embedded in the food system that needs to be redesigned to emphasize feeding people. I think that that's really sort of significant, important. I know in the interest of, let's see, I have another question. Oh, we got a couple of questions here. Let's see. I don't think I understand Valeria's question, but it says, what do you think about farmers of color, quote, gentrifying farms that are being abandoned because they aren't profitable in the consumer market? So when you think about gentrifying, that isn't what I understand as gentrification. It doesn't sort of relate to farmers of color on farms.
Exactly.
I don't know. Anyway, well, unless you had something you want.
I don't
have anything. Okay. And here's a comment also from Valeria. Feeding ourselves outside the mainstream market will be the target goal. Here's a question from Ariana, and I'll make a friendly amendment. It says when it comes to food security and food deserts, we don't use that language in the food movement. But in rural and urban areas, let's just say food inaccessibility, how can indoor farming, especially in urban areas, shift the narrative of growing? Do you have any ideas on how indoor growing can shift that narrative of growing? I don't know what they mean.
I don't know much about indoor growing, but I would say the thimbleful of knowledge that I do have about it, I would say that is another opportunity, right?
Yeah. For
people to engage in agriculture. I don't know enough about it, but if that is something that appeals to you, right? That's like on the tech side, right? It's not technology, but it is technology.
Well,
right?
there's a lot of technology in indoor growing. Yeah.
So again, that is a way that, you know, Black folks could be involved in agriculture, growing stuff. It's not in the dirt. It might be hydroponics and all that.
Yeah. But let me just add my little, you know, just I think that folks are always asking Black farmers to do what's new, what's hot, what's happening. And the problem when it comes to indoor ag is often, is the food really as nutriently rich naturally, right? Who's carrying that stuff up and down those stairs, right? If you got a rooftop garden, how does that stuff get up there? How does it get down? There's labor, there's all that. So to me, it seems like some of the ideas and quote innovative ideas are really cost prohibitive. And just as somebody who's been studying this, most cities do not have the amount of land to grow for the caloric benefit of the adults in that community. So I think sometimes people think about how to, you know, get around rural areas. And I think if you're talking about feeding people nutrient-rich, affordable, and culturally appropriate food, you have to talk about, you know, rural farmers. You can't ignore the rurality of it. And I think in terms of justice in this country, you cannot do that without talking about Black, Latinx, and Indigenous farmers. And so I feel like, right, you know, we can't just be like, oh, here's something new, but where's that money come from? Who's going to, you know, so I just think that there's complexity in some of the answers that we have.
Monica, I'm only watching the time because it's 6.
Yes.
And I mean, I can stay here, but I just want to,
I know.
Tune in and,
I know.
You know, or host.
Is there? So I guess at this point we've got a few more questions, but let's see. I think we can go ahead and bring this to a close. Unless, I mean, is there something else that you wanted to?
No, I'm good. I'm good. I just have loved this so much.
It should be good because this is a gorgeous experience on so many levels. I'm just so proud of you. I'm so excited for you, and I'm so excited for this current moment. I feel like there's a lot to unearth and a lot of stories to tell, and your love for farmers is so clear with your pen. The power of your pen is really gorgeous, and I'm just really excited to see what's next.
Thank you, Monica, and same to you. I mean, it has been such a pleasure getting to spend time with you and celebrate your work.
More, please.
More, please.
I'm coming to California.
Wow.
I just want to thank you both so much. This was a wonderful conversation. Thank you to everybody watching and the audience at home. Y'all had such great questions and great comments. Just as a reminder, folks can go back through the chat, click on those links at any point, and they will stay up. So you do not have to rush and click through them all. You just visit this URL as many times as you want. I will be adding captions to this event, putting it back up on YouTube. Our YouTube channel is just YouTube.com/Charis Circle. You'll also get an email at the address where you registered for this event, letting you know that that's ready. So you can share that. Since it is more accessible, we prefer you to share that one. Please click this teal button at the bottom of your screen to buy We Are Each Other's Harvest from Charis Books. As an independent feminist bookstore, it really helps us when you buy your event books directly from us. The other thing it is my honor and my job to do is to remind folks that we're also a nonprofit. And we know everybody's money is all over the place in this pandemic, but we appreciate any dollars you have to help our work, and it helps us pay for this platform, and it helps us bring all different kinds of community groups into our space. So we're very grateful for your support. Thank you to both of you. Really, really grateful. This was a beautiful conversation. So I hope you both stay safe and well, and that maybe next time we actually get to gather physically together in Atlanta.
Sounds great. Thank you so much for hosting. This has been beautiful. Thank you.
Good night.